Swanee, God has smiled on the Gators, no question about it.
Hey Gator fans. So the original script of this video that I had typed out was for the FanDuel over and unders for the SEC in 2026 for about a week ago or maybe even a week and a half ago. But since then they have actually risen since they originally came out. Originally, the Florida Gators were at 6.5 wins as in terms of the betting total, and now they've actually have risen up to 7.5. So I had to adjust my preparation for this video a little bit. But what the topic of this video is, what is the Gators' true floor and ceiling for the 2026 season? Now, I'm not a sports bettor, I'm not a sports gambler. I'm just not really into gambling like that. But I do use betting odds to measure my expectations for whatever team I support, not necessarily in betting in terms of like what I think the range could be for them in terms of wins and losses. Now, if you're betting Florida at over 7.5, that means you think they're going to go 8-4 or better. If you're betting them under, then you think they're going to go 7-5 or worse. Now, unfortunately, for a majority of this decade, the Gators, granted mostly because of Billy Napier, but alas, have been one of the more disappointing programs in the SEC. And the only one that you could argue maybe is a little bit worse over the last few years is Auburn and Arkansas. So they've had a bad run, obviously, these last 4 years. If you look at the entire conference projections, there's quite a few teams that either have the same amount as Florida or they're more. Like Tennessee's at 7.5, Ole Miss, Oklahoma 8, Texas A&M, Georgia, Alabama, Texas. All those teams are at 7.5, like Florida, in terms of the updated over and unders. And Florida has to face Oklahoma, Georgia, Texas. Let's see, Ole Miss. There is no Tennessee on here. They have to face four of those teams that are now above them in terms of over unders, but they do have a few teams that have the same amount. Missouri, Auburn, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, and Kentucky are a little bit behind Florida in that department. And comparison of FanDuel's evaluations, Florida could be a better team and yet still have a tough road ahead, and that the wins and losses might not even determine if their quality of play is much better than last year. Now, considering Florida has faced Miami twice twice and Utah twice, and a couple of double-digit win FSU teams over the last 4 years, having a tough schedule is something that Florida is accustomed to. So my question is, where do you see what's the range that you see Florida's season falling in? And I break Florida's schedule into three categories: potential wins, toss-ups, meaning 50-50, and potential losses. Like, I'm not really confident in their chances of winning. In my opinion, I think Florida's floor is somewhere between 5-7 and 6-6, and I think Florida's ceiling is somewhere between 7-5 to 8-4. So I think the range would be 5-7 to 8-4. I think that's a very realistic, not necessarily optimistic, but a realistic number that could happen to Florida, because John Summerall, while he has shown at Tulane and at Troy that he can turn those programs around and win quickly, because in both of those programs he did not have a losing record in all four of those years with those teams, and the turnaround was immediate. Granted, it was Group of Five competition, not SEC competition, as he found out in the Ole Miss game when he lost to them in the playoffs. So here are the games that I think are potential victories for Florida. Now, let's get the two out the way: Florida Atlantic and Campbell. I'm not really going to go into it. We should know why. It should be pretty self-explanatory why Florida should win those games. It sucks that we even have to say that with hesitancy because of Billy Napier and how he found a way to lose to those teams. Lose to one of those kinds of teams, a Group of Five school and an FCS school, and now if John Summer wins both of them, it will be the first time UF has started 2-0 since 2021, which should not be the case. But anyways, Florida Atlantic, Campbell, those should be potential victories. Ole Miss, I have as a potential victory, but I have an asterisk with that because Trinidad Chambliss right now is listed as inactive for the 2026 season by the NCAA, and the time for him to apply for the NFL draft that's coming up late April, that has already passed by. He can't apply now. So he maybe could sign with the UFL, or the USFL, but he can't go to the NFL. If he's able to play for Ole Miss this year, then I put that in the potential loss category because he's a really good quarterback. He gets the ball quick and fast. He's very decisive. He's athletic enough, very accurate passer of the ball. If he plays for Ole Miss, I think they're going to be a much tougher outing than they would be. Then obviously they would be without him. And another thing with Ole Miss is that, obviously Pete Golding is familiar with the program because he was the defensive coordinator under Lane Kiffin, but he wasn't the head coach. And now he's putting in his own imprint on the program. And they're obviously going to have a transitional year because so many guys left the program after Lane Kiffin to follow Lane Kiffin to the LSU team or to go to the NFL or to go elsewhere. So Ole Miss, to me, I have a potential victory, but I have an asterisk there if Trinidad Chambliss is ready to go. Now, with South Carolina, I think that's a potential victory because I think there's a good chance this could be Shane Beamer's last year in South Carolina. They're talented in some areas, particularly along the defensive line. They obviously play hard for him, but he has a very tough schedule this year. He has not only Florida on the road, but he's got Tennessee, he's got Georgia, he has Kentucky with a new head coach, he has Texas A&M to go along with Alabama, and he has to play Clemson in the annual out-of-conference in-state rivalry matchup. So South Carolina has a very tough year. I think this should be a game that Florida this is a game that Florida should steal a victory from at home. Vanderbilt, I think Vanderbilt's going to drop off from last year. 10-2 is a very high season for Vandy. They don't have Diego Pavia, so the heart and soul of the locker room is going to be gone. A lot of players that were on that team are probably going to be gone because the moxie that exudes from Vanderbilt is not going to be the same. Now, they do have a freshman quarterback in Jared Curtis who flipped from Georgia to Vandy to start, but he's a freshman quarterback. You don't know how he's going to play. I'm not saying he's going to be bad or he's going to be good. I just haven't seen him play in order to know who he can be. And it seems like Vanderbilt's putting a lot of eggs in that basket. And when a team puts a lot of eggs in that basket, quarterback-wise, I know this from what Florida went through last year, it could have bad consequences on the horizon. And obviously with Florida State, they're a dead program. Whatever issues Florida had under Billy Napier, it pales in comparison to what the problems Florida State is having under Mike Norvell. I think Mike Norvell is going to be gone before the month of November. He's not staying there. And we've seen Florida State teams quit under Mike Norvell several times. And the fact that he's no longer going to be there, they're probably going to quit again by the time, and they're going to be disinterested by the time that the Florida game has came by. Because last year they had a chance to actually make a bowl game, and you could tell Florida wanted to win that game more than Florida State did, which is a bad sign. Toss-ups, Auburn, first SEC matchup of the year. New head coach with Alex Golesh, who beat Florida last year in the Swamp, and it will be John Sermo's first SEC matchup. To me, that's the most important matchup SEC-wise for Florida this year. How do they play on the road against the new head coach for Auburn while having a new head coach at Florida? And it's a tough environment. When Auburn is good, it's one of the tougher environments in the conference. And there's still that Auburn and Florida rivalry that resonates mainly with the older generations of each fan base. But Florida and Auburn, it's an unfamiliar environment because Florida has not been in Auburn since 2011. They don't play each other as much as they once did. If you're an SEC football historian, and if you're a Florida fan back through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and 80s, if you had to ask Florida fans who was the second biggest rival to Florida, it wasn't LSU or Tennessee because those rivalries didn't really take off until the 90s. It was Auburn back then. Auburn was that big major rival before Tennessee, before LSU came to prominence. So that rivalry still resonates with both fan bases. Missouri, tricky to me. That's the trap game on the calendar. It's a tricky team to play. They're not going to have Kirby Moore, who was their offense coordinator the last few years, and he went to Washington State to become their head coach. So they have a new offense coordinator. Austin Simmons has been recently named the starting quarterback for that team. It was a guy that Florida was trying to get out of high school and reclassify early, but he ended up doing that with Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. And with Lane Kiffin gone and Trinidad Chambliss being the starter, he was like, you know what, I need to transfer out and go to a place where I have a chance to start at. And he chose Mizzou. Missouri is also a tough place for Florida to play at. They haven't won there since 2019. And the last two times they had a chance to win there in 2021, they lost in overtime. And in 2023, I know this in heartbreaking fashion, if Florida stops them on a 4th and 17, they would have won the game. So tough, tricky matchup. Another toss-up is Kentucky because it's right after Florida plays both Georgia and Oklahoma in back-to-back weeks, and Kentucky has had Florida's numbers. So getting them right after the Georgia and Florida matchups, I think that's going to be very tough. And it's on the road in Lexington too, and Kentucky fans, they are loud when Florida steps into the building. So those are the 3 toss-up games right here. And potential losses, obviously, Texas, Georgia, and Oklahoma, 3 really talented football programs that have been developed well by their head coaches and have been college football playoff contenders for quite some time. I don't see Florida at this stage of John Summerall's tenure beating them just yet. We'll see what happens. I mean, Florida under Billy Napier did beat Texas last year, so it's not impossible. And they gave Georgia a good run for their money. But I just think right now is probably a little bit too premature to pick them to beat those teams. So that is my floor and ceiling range for Florida, 5-7 to 8-4. You guys tell me where I'm right and where I could be wrong at.